All right, chapter 9. Henry has fled from the battle. He's wandered around through the forest a little bit, and now he has joined a column of wounded soldiers marching to the rear. And he was just asked by a tattered soldier where he was injured, and of course he wasn't injured anywhere, and so he has sort of fled from that man, but he's still among the column of the wounded. And now is a good time as any to stop and ask, what was the title of this book again? Oh, right, The Red Badge of Courage. In this particular case, as we're going to see either in this chapter or the next chapter, I can't remember, the Red Badge of Courage is a wound, right? Like, it's bloody, and it shows that you stayed and fought. Henry doesn't have one. All of these soldiers with their bloody injuries are branded. They're wearing a badge of courage that cannot be removed. The bloody injuries that they carry on their bodies. And so that tells you that these are going to be important chapters to our theme and to our plot. Things that, you know, if you're going to be writing a literary analysis paper later, you probably want to pay attention to. So let's keep an eye on these chapters and think about what's going on symbolically. The youth fell back in the line until the tattered soldier was not in sight. Then he started to walk along with the others. But he was among wounds. Blood was flowing from that mob of men. Because of the tattered soldier's question, he now felt that his shame could be viewed. He was continually glancing around to see if the men were looking at his guilt. So he feels like because he's not injured, somebody's going to notice, and they're going to realize that he's guilty of being a coward, guilty of running away, all those sorts of things. At times he wished he were wounded. He believed the persons with torn bodies were unusually happy. He wished that he too had a wound, a red badge of courage. Ah, there it is, the title of the book. Whenever you see the title of the book in a chapter, you definitely want to be like, oh, hey, this might be important. And it is. Let's analyze what he says here. He believed the persons with torn bodies were unusually happy. That's ironic. It's paradoxical. There's nothing happy about having a bullet wound through you. He wished that he too had been wounded. It sort of shows the irrationality that he's got. If he had been injured, at least he would have been brave. Question. Would you rather be a coward or get shot? You know, like, that's kind of a lose-lose question, but there it is. The dying soldier who had passed earlier was now at his side. The man's eyes were still staring into the unknown. His gray, frightening face had drawn attention in the crowd. The men, slowed to his pace, were walking with him. They were discussing his wound, questioning him and giving him advice. He refused their help, telling them to go and leave him alone. The shadows of his face were deepening, and his tight lips seemed to hold inside the cry of great despair. There was a stiffness in the movements of his body. As he went along, he seemed always looking for a certain place, like one who goes to choose a grave. That's a simile, but this soldier's turning gray. He's lost so much blood that his skin doesn't have the right tone. He walks in a jerky motion like somebody who's going to keel over, and he keeps looking around like he's looking for a place to die. This is a pretty dark imagery here. Something in the manner of the man, as he waved away the bloody and pitying soldiers, made the youth scream in terror. Hurrying forward, he lay a trembling hand upon the man's arm. As the latter slowly turned his pale face toward him, the youth cried, "God, Jim Conklin!" Ah, it's Jim, the tall soldier. The tall soldier made a little smile. "Hello, Henry," he said. The youth stopped and stared strangely. He finally spoke. Oh, Jim! Oh, Jim! Oh, Jim!" The tall soldier held out his bloody hand. There was a strange black and red combination of old and new blood upon it. "Where have you been, Henry?" he asked. He continued in a dull voice. "I thought maybe you got killed. Today has been a bad one. I was worrying about it." How bad does it feel now for Henry to think that Jim, who's been shot and dying and stayed, was worrying about him when he wasn't even injured? The youth still cried sadly, "Oh, Jim! Oh, Jim! Oh, Jim!" "You know," said the tall soldier, "I was out there." He made a careful movement. "And Lord, what a show. And I got shot. I got shot. Yeah, I got shot. He repeated this fact in a surprised way, as if he did not know how it happened. The youth put forth anxious arms to help him, but the tall soldier went firmly on as if moved by another force. Since the youth's arrival, as a support for his friend, the other wounded men had ceased to display much interest. They occupied themselves again in dragging their own sorrows along. Suddenly, as the two friends walked, the tall soldier seemed to be overcome by a terror. His face turned ashen. He grasped the youth's arm and looked all about him, as if fearing he would be heard by one of the others. Then he began to speak in a shaking whisper. "I'll tell you what I'm afraid of, Henry. I'll tell you what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid I'll fall down. And then, those heavy wagons, they'll run over me. That's what I'm afraid of." The youth cried out to him excitedly. "I'll take care of you, Jim. I'll take care of you, I promise. To God I will." "Will you, Henry?" the tall soldier begged. Yes, I tell you, I'll take care of you, Jim," spoke the youth. He could not speak correctly because his heart seemed to be filling his throat. But the tall soldier continued to beg in a lowly way. He now hung to the youth's arm like a child. His eyes rolled in the wilderness of his terror. "I was always a good friend to you, wasn't I, Henry? I've always been a good fellow, haven't I? And this isn't much to ask, is it? Just to pull me out of the road? I'd do it for you, wouldn't I, Henry?" He paused in pitiful fear to await his friend's reply. The youth reached a state of sorrow where his tears burned him. He tried to express the depth of his feeling, but could only make strange motions. However, the tall soldier seemed suddenly to forget all those fears. He became again the determined and awful sight he had been. He went forward. The youth wanted his friend to lean upon him, but the other always shook his head and strangely protested. No. Leave me alone. Leave me alone." His look started again upon the unknown. He moved with unknowable purpose, and all of the youth's offers he brushed aside. No, leave me alone. Leave me alone." The youth had to follow. After a while, he heard a voice talking softly near his shoulder. Turning, he saw that it belonged to the tattered soldier. "You ought to take him out of the road, son. There's a regiment coming down the road fast, and he'll get run over. He's not going to live more than about 5 minutes, you can see that. You ought to take him out of the road." "Where does he get his strength from?" "Lord knows," cried the youth. He was shaking his hands helplessly. He ran forward and then grasped the tall soldier by the arm. Jim, he began, "come with me." The tall soldier weakly tried to pull himself free. "Huh?" he said emptily. He stared at the youth for a moment. At last he spoke, as if a shadow of understanding. "Oh, into the fields. Oh." He started blindly through the grass. The youth turned once to look at the riders and guns of the regiment. He was pulled from this view by a sharp cry from the tattered man. "God, he's running!" Turning his head quickly, the youth saw his friend running and falling towards some little bushes. The boy's heart seemed to tear itself free from his body at this sight. He made a noise of pain. He and the tattered man began to follow. When he came to the tall soldier, he began to beg with all the words he could find. Jim, what are you doing? What makes you do this? You'll hurt yourself." The same purpose was in the tall soldier's face. He protested in a dulled way, keeping his eyes on the unknown place of his determination. No, don't touch me. Leave me alone. Leave me alone." The youth, shocked and filled with wonder at the tall soldier, began fearfully to question him. "Where are you going, Jim? What are you thinking about? Where are you going? Tell me, won't you, Jim?" The tall soldier turned round. In his eyes there was a great appeal. "Leave me, can't you? Leave me alone for a minute." The youth drew back. "Why, Jim," he said in a blind way, "what's the matter with you?" The tall soldier turned and struggled dangerously, went forward. The youth and the tattered soldier followed, as fearful as if they had been whipped, feeling unable to face the wounded man if he should again turn on them. They began to have thoughts of a holy affair. There was something in these movements of the dying soldier, like a mad religion. They were afraid. They held back as if he might use, if he wished it, as an awful power. At last they saw him stop and stand motionless. Hurrying to him, they saw that his face wore an expression telling that he had at last found the place for which he had struggled. His thin figure was straight. His bloody hands were quietly at his side. He was waiting with patience for something that he had come to meet. He was at the place. They paused and stood expectant. There was a silence. Finally, the chest of the dying soldier began to lift with a strained motion. It increased in force until it was as if an animal were within and kicking fiercely to be free. There's another simile. It's another animal simile. Jim is losing his humanity here somehow. This sight of gradual death made the youth breathless, and once, as his friend rolled his eyes, the boy saw something in them that made him sink, crying to the ground. He raised his voice in a last call. "Jim! Jim! Jim!" The tall soldier opened his lips and spoke. He made a motion. "Leave me alone. Don't touch me. Leave me." There was another silence while he waited. Suddenly his form stiffened and straightened. Then it shook strangely. He stared into space. To the two watchers, there was a strange and vast dignity in the firm lines of his awful face. He was attacked by a gradual strangeness that slowly filled him. For a moment, the shaking of his legs caused him to dance a sort of awful dance. His arms beat wildly about his head in an expression of devilish delight. His tall figure stretched itself to its full height. There was a slight tearing sound. Then he began to fall forward, slow and straight in the manner of a falling tree. The left shoulder struck the ground first. "God," said the tattered soldier. The youth had watched, unable to move. His face had expressed every suffering he had imagined for his friend. He now jumped to his feet and, going closer, gazed upon the gray face. The mouth was open, and the teeth showed in a laugh. As the blue jacket fell away from the body, he could see that the man's side looked as if it had been eaten away by a wolf. The youth turned with sudden burning anger toward the battlefield. He seemed about to deliver a speech. "Hell!" The red sun shone in the sky. Interesting that the only word that comes out is hell. Is that an indication, as Sherman said, that war is hell? We also have a red sun in the sky. Is this some sort of a change for Henry? He's good Lord. I wish I was better at this whole technology thing. That suddenly the red is the color of courage. It's sunset. We've got this red light in the sky. We've got this call to hell. We got this guy Jim Conklin, who JC. You remember back at the beginning? Is he a Christ figure? I still think it's a stretch, but he dies, and it changes something in Henry. We'll have to see what that changes next chapter, but this is an important chapter. It's one you want to go back and look at again. All the death to this point was impersonal to him. He didn't know anybody who died. Jim is his friend. It's the first time he's seen death on a personal level in this combat. And it was pretty traumatic. So we'll see what happens to Henry next time.